Hard to see it, but hopefully you guys see a bit of it. There's a bit of smoke coming out of the brakes. Why? I will tell you why. So I took the car around the block here, just put gas in it, and to confirm everything was good. And now I've located a new issue. So these are the fun and games that go with old cars. Notice this side's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to come here in the shop. And we're going to open my toolbox drawer. And we're going to grab a temperature gun. Why? Okay, let's come over to this side here. And the temperature on this rim is 22 degrees. Let's come over to this side now. Temperature on this wheel is 43 degrees Celsius, of course. What does that tell me? It tells me that this car has collapsing brake hoses. What happens with the rubber brake hoses over time is they actually internally collapse. And then the brakes stick on. How did I know this? Because as I was coming up the street, coming back here to the shop, the car was pulling to the left. And it was pulling hard every time you touched the brake. Why? Because the right side brake hose is collapsed. So the fluid is only being fed to the left side into the caliper. So we're going to let that cool down a little bit first, obviously. And we'll get it back here in the shop. We'll get the tires off it. And we'll go ahead and fix that. Okay, we're up. We're on stands. And we got our tires off. So let's have a look here. We're 43.5 on the face of the rotor on this side. We are 134, almost 135 degrees on this side. It's cooling down a little bit, but it's still over 100 degrees on this side. So almost between 75 and 100 degrees difference from one side to the other. So that's definitely where our problem is. I'll get the back tires loose as well, because I'm going to go ahead and pull them off, because we're going to go ahead and bleed everything properly, of course. But I'll have to raid what I have for my Caravel, because they're pretty well the same car. And that'll give us all the parts we need to be able to fix this. Oh, jeez. Those lug nuts are hot. Okay, welcome back here. So I've let everything cool down, and I went ahead and I pulled the brake hose off. You'll notice on this side, you can still kind of see a bit of the crosshatch on the rotors, and they're still pretty clean. They've gotten hot at some point, but not that hot. So I've gone ahead and I pulled off the hose on this side. And on this side, which was the offending side, it's hard to tell, because obviously this isn't smell-o-vision, but all I can smell is hot brake on this side. And what you notice here is, see that banding? This side hasn't been working properly for quite a while for it to do that. So I did what any good mechanic would do. I confirmed my repair. I took my brake hoses here and I cut them to have a quick look. And it's hard to tell, but that orifice there is definitely smaller than it should be, because I took and I sacrificed a couple old brake hoses I had here. I bought these and they showed up and they were the wrong ones, actually. So for the cost of a brake hose, that's what the orifice should look like. So what happens over time is they internally collapse. So a set of brake hoses should do us wonders. I'll repack the bearings too, because they've definitely gotten hot. I'll go ahead and I'll re all the anchors and make sure they're all cleaned up and good. We're gonna have to replace the pads. Luckily I had a set kicking around. I may swap out the calipers just because I have a set of rebuilds already sitting here. So we'll do that. We'll bleed out all the fluid, which right now, that one's kind of dirty. It's hard to tell. Come over here, I guess. Fluid that's coming out of here is, as you can see, kind of a brown color, and that's because it's gotten hot too. So we'll go ahead and we'll flush out the whole system. I'll bleed it all the way around and we'll get rid of that crap. And then we'll try driving it again, see what happens. Okay. So at this point, put the new brake hoses on. I got everything pulled apart here, cleaned up. I've cleaned and lubricated the... Why my camera doesn't want to focus, but anywho. The anchors. Cleaned all the old grease off of everything. And I ended up, I have another set of hardware for the brakes, so we'll go ahead and use that instead because it's a little cleaner and one of those clips is bent. The rotor's all cleaned up here, which it's funny because I ran into something similar on mine, well, my 73, when I was going through doing the brakes on it. When I ordered the rotors and I got them, I got two different rotors like this. I got one heavy duty rotor, which is what this is, and I got one of the regular ones. And the only difference is the heavy duty rotor has these strengthening ribs that go around the hub. But anyway, it doesn't really make that big of a difference anyway. We're going to reuse the rotors the way they are because they're actually not bad. If I run my finger over them, my nail doesn't catch on anything. So I'll just clean up and chamfer the outside edges of the pads so that they don't scrub this little ridge. And they'll burn themselves in on these, no problem. The only reason I'm not going to use the pads that came off it is, if you look, you can see quite a difference in wear from the inside to the outside on the side that the hose was really bad on compared to the other side. So I'm just not going to use them because of the uneven wear. And then I figured I'd show you this. This is what happens to brake fluid when it gets really hot. See the color? It comes out like an auburn or an amber color. So that's why anytime you run into an issue like this, you're better to flush out the whole system. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put the seals in. Just wanted to show how I do it. So we have our grease seal. So your grease seal, it of course just sort of sets in here, and you just want them to be in flush with the surface of the rotor. So what I usually do is I look and see what I have for a socket that's going to go ahead and fit over top and press on the steel ring. So we're going to go ahead and we can put it in, and then we're going to tap on the socket, which, as you can see, I use my heavier truck tools a lot more for this kind of stuff than I do work on trucks, just because a lot of these are older sockets for some of the older full float rear diffs that are no longer using that style. Like that's a 4-pin. That's what the old Dodge rear ends and some of the Chevs had. There's the 6-pin style, 8-pin, 10-pin. You know, a lot of that stuff's becoming obsolete as they change the style of the retaining lock nuts on the back axles. But anyway, so I just go ahead and I tap them in from here, which it's obviously, I'll put the camera down to do that. Okay, so like I said, I just take them till they're flush. And what the hell is that? Oh, thumbprint. Okay, so we can go ahead and put them back on now. Okay, so I've already put the, let's slide it out here a little bit. There we go. So I've already obviously repacked the bearings and cleaned the insides of the rotors and got all the old grease out, so we'll put our inner bearing back in. And then put our washer, which has already been cleaned. And then we're going to grab our spindle nut. And now there's two ways you can tighten the spindle nut. There is a specification. If you pull out the Chrysler manual, it does actually give you a specification for what to torque it to. Now that being said, do you necessarily have to do it that way? Not really. The Chrysler must provide a specification for every fastener on a vehicle. All manufacturers do. So what I'm going to show you is the way I've always done them, and I've never had a problem yet. Knock on wood, of course. And yes, those are waist grips. So I go all the way tight, and I spin my rotor and make sure it's seated. And I go half a turn, and we do the same thing. And you'll see there's a bit of play there now. Now we're going to go back half a turn. No play. And we're going to go back an eighth. We're going to check. Where a lot of guys go wrong is they'll come in here and they'll go ahead and they'll tighten it right down like that. And that's fine. But what you're doing right now is you're setting the bearing lash, and that's too tight. So I'm going to go back just a hair. At one point in time I used to do about, I don't know how many bearings a day. Now when you put this sucker on, you're probably going to have to rotate it a few times until you find the sweet spot where it lines up with the slot here, because where that slot is where your cotter pin is going to go. And you always replace the cotter pin. You never reuse a cotter pin. Never, never, never reuse one. I don't know why you would with the cost of them anyway. It's not like they're expensive. Cotter pin in, and then fold it over. Now some guys fold them around the spindles like this, which is fine. I do that a fair bit. And other guys, they'll just take it and they'll put it over and then fold it back over. It's up to you. Both serve the same function, which is to prevent the cotter pin from popping out and that nut from backing off any further. So a lot of that comes down to preference. You have to excuse my cheap side cutters I have here at home, which suck. You'd figure I'd just buy a better set for at home, but anyway. Okay. Now ready to put our dust cap on. Okay, so to put the dust caps on, what I have is nothing more than a piece of 2-inch diameter exhaust pipe. And because these are aftermarket rotors, dust cap's not going to sit 100% flat. I don't know if it's because they don't machine the ridge deep enough for them to sit in, but I noticed that with aftermarket rotors on Chryslers. When you buy these unicast rotors, they always do that. So that's our dust cap on. So next thing up will be our pads. In this case, how these work is your rear pad, it comes in and it slides in here like this, and it just sits in this ridge, which is why we clean this ridge out, so that it actually does slide properly. Until I rotate it like that and get it stuck. Anyway, so that's the rear. Front pad's going to sit inside the caliper. So what I usually do is I take my caliper and my pad and a bit of brake lubricant or grease, whatever you have. I mean, it's basically the same thing. The only difference is brake lubricant's usually synthetic so that it doesn't swell any rubber that it comes in contact with. So we take, and I just kind of lube up the ears of the calipers to protect it a little bit. And then your outside brake pad on these just slides in and sits on top of the ears. Something like that. And this is a brand new caliper. It's just crusty from sitting around the shop. Because for a long time there, I didn't have heat in the shop in the winter. So things would get damp in the winter. Anyway, good note. Bleeder screw always goes to the top of the caliper. I have seen that many times with customers changing their own brakes, or having their cousins, sisters, neighbors, uncles, aunt change their brakes, or I've actually seen licensed mechanics make that mistake too. Being in a hurry, throw a caliper on a vehicle, and then wonder why they can't get the brakes to bleed, because when you do that, what happens is, in a hydraulic system, like a brake system, which is of course a hydraulic system, what happens is the air is going to be lighter than the fluid. So when you're bleeding them, the fluid is going to go to the bottom and the air is going to go to the top. So that's why they put the bleeder screw at the top, so that when you're bleeding, to remove the air from the system, it's coming out where the bleeder screw is. So you're actually able to force the air out of the system. So if you put it upside down, you're going to have a bad time, because it's not going to bleed the way you think. So yeah, there was one clip here that was bent, and then I got looking in my toolbox drawer, and probably about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe not that long, somewhere in there anyway, a couple years ago, I bought a front stub, or K-member I should say on this car, it's a K-member, for my Plymouth Caravelle, which is basically the exact same car underneath as a Volare. Chrysler essentially built the same car from 1976 to 1989, with the only difference being cosmetic. Anyway, this is the hardware for these. And they just kind of go in and sit in here like this. Well, like that to be exact. So, anyway, I noticed that one of these clips here on this side's all mangled. So rather than put that back on there, we'll just take a minute and we'll swap it out for one that isn't mangled. Put it back together there. because that's a little anti-rattle clip that goes on top of the mounting anchor clip. I even had newer bolts and everything in it too, so might as well go ahead and use them. Because I think you can buy all this stuff separate anyway if you had to. There's no sense in buying something you already have kicking around the shop. Straighten one little ear I just noticed, but other than that, they're actually in pretty good shape. By some form of miracle. Okay, this is what everything looks like assembled here. Correct orientation of the clips. With everything serviced, you'll notice that the calipers slide nice and easy, which is what we want. So, this side's ready to be bled now. Just going to finish doing the other side and go ahead and bleed everything. Okay, we're all bled up. Both sides are done here. We're ready to throw tires on it, torque them, and yeah. Okay, so new hoses are on. Took it out and I drove it. And we have 28.6 on this side. 28.7 on this side. So we are good. I also realized the car had air shocks, so I put a bit of air in the back of them. So I think the stance is a little nicer myself. So we're on to the next project.